The dense emerald canopy of Zephyr's vast forests trembled under the roar of a failing engine high above. Streaks of fire painted the twilight sky as a small reconnaissance craft, its hull scorched and smoking, cut a swathe through the tranquil expanse of towering ferns and thick underbrush. Inside the tumbling vessel, Sarika, a Valerian navigator, struggled against her harness. Her eyes, wide with the instinctual fear of a predator cornered, flickered over the control panels, their lights blinking out one by one. The comlink crackled and died, her desperate calls for help swallowed by the static. As the ground rushed up to meet her, Sarika braced for impact. The ship groaned, a torturous metal wail before it slammed into the earth, burrowing a path of destruction before shuddering to a halt. The world went silent, but for the hiss of leaking coolant and the crackle of fires feeding on the broken wings. Several miles away, Jack sat by a campfire, his seasoned features illuminated by the flames. The quiet evening had been his alone, the soft chirps of nocturnal creatures and the rustle of leaves his only company, until the sky had lit up with the unwelcome spectacle of an intruding craft. "What in the stars?" he muttered, standing abruptly. His hand went to the pistol at his side out of old habit as he watched the sky. The crash site wasn't far. Decision made, he doused the fire and headed toward his shed. Striding into the dark, cluttered space, Jack grabbed a medical kit, a flashlight, and a sturdy rope. Just in case, he mumbled to himself, the old instincts kicking in, preparing him for whatever he might find. Minutes later, Jack's ATV tore through the underbrush, its lights cutting bright swaths through the gloom. He found the crash site illuminated by flames and scattered debris. Dismounting, he approached cautiously, his senses alert for any signs of danger or survivors. There, amid the wreckage, lay Sarika, half-conscious and pinned under a twisted segment of her craft. Her breathing was labored, her skin an ethereal glow against the firelight. "Hey, can you hear me?" Jack called out as he stepped closer, his voice steady but warm. Sarika's head turned slightly, her eyes barely focusing. "Help," she managed, her voice a strained whisper. Jack assessed the situation quickly. "Hang on, I'm going to get you out of here," he promised. Working swiftly, he used the leverage of a broken wing part to lift the debris just enough to pull her free. As he gently dragged her away from the flaming wreckage, Sarika clung to consciousness, her gaze fixed on this human who had come to her aid. "Why?" she breathed, not understanding his motivations. "No time for questions now. We need to get you somewhere safe and treat those injuries," Jack said, checking her for wounds. Together, they made their way back to the ATV, Jack supporting her weight. "You're lucky I found you first," he added, a hint of seriousness underlining his words. "Not everyone would have helped." Sarika, overwhelmed and in pain, leaned against him, her mind racing with confusion and fear, but also a flicker of gratitude. As they rode back to Jack's cabin, the stars above looked on silently, the only witnesses to the unlikely alliance forming on the surface of Zephyr. The dense forest blurred past as Jack maneuvered the ATV deftly along a hidden trail, its beams cutting through the night. Sarika clung weakly to his back, the pain and shock of the crash dulling her senses. Each bump and jolt sent a fresh wave of pain coursing through her body, but the steady warmth of the human holding her ignited a spark of hope in her fogged mind. Jack glanced over his shoulder, his eyes briefly meeting hers in the dim light. "Hold on, we're almost there," he reassured her, pushing the vehicle faster as the outline of his cabin came into view. The cabin was a sturdy structure of wood and metal, blending into the surroundings with an almost camouflaged precision. Jack brought the ATV to a skidding halt outside and gently helped Sarika off, supporting her weight as they approached the door. Inside, the cabin was warmly lit and cluttered with a lifetime of both human and alien artifacts, a testament to Jack's years of service in the interspecies conflict and subsequent solitude. He eased Sarika onto a makeshift medical table set up in the living room. "Let's get a look at those injuries," Jack murmured, his hands skilled and gentle as he cut away the remnants of her suit and assessed her wounds. He cleaned and dressed a deep gash on her arm and applied a splint to a suspected fractured rib. "Why are you helping me?" Sarika asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and mistrust. Her species, the Valerians, had always been at odds with humans, taught from birth that they were nothing but savages and warmongers. Jack paused, his hands still for a moment. "I've seen enough hate and pain for a lifetime," he said simply. "Helping you. It's the right thing to do." As he worked, Jack explained the basics of his life. how he had left the conflict behind, choosing isolation over continual violence. "I'm not your enemy," he added, meeting her gaze with a sincerity that felt disarming. Sarika listened, her initial wariness slowly melting away as the human's actions contradicted everything she had been taught. The cabin, filled with signs of a life lived in peace and reflection, seemed to echo his sentiments. After stabilizing her condition, Jack prepared a simple meal, insisting she needed to regain her strength. They ate in an awkward silence initially, but as the night deepened, so did their conversation. "You must miss your home," Jack observed, noting the faraway look in her eyes as she spoke of Valeria. "I do," Sarika admitted. "But there's nothing left for me there now. This crash, it might have saved me from a worse fate." Her words trailed off, laden with unspoken stories. Jack nodded, understanding the weight of fleeing one's home all too well. "Perhaps, then, this is a chance for a new beginning," he suggested, trying to offer comfort. Sarika considered this, her gaze settling on the various peaceful relics around the room. "Perhaps," she agreed softly, a flicker of a smile crossing her face. As the night wore on, the barriers between them continued to soften, their shared experiences fostering an unexpected kinship. Jack showed her the stars through an old telescope, pointing out constellations known to both their peoples. "Look, that's the Navigator's Star," he pointed out, a bright point in the sky that both humans and Valerians used for deep space travel orientation. Sarika looked through the telescope, moved by the shared piece of sky. "It's beautiful," she whispered, feeling for the first time in a long while a sense of connection, not just to Jack, but to the possibilities that lay ahead. Together they looked up at the night sky, the stars witnessing the slow bridging of a divide that had once seemed insurmountable. In the quiet solitude of Jack's cabin, nestled deep in the forests of Zephyr, a fragile alliance was forming, one that held the promise of something greater than either of them had anticipated. As the dawn light filtered through the curtains of Jack's cabin, it found Sarika and Jack already awake, sitting across from each other at a small makeshift table. Sarika sipped cautiously at a cup of herbal tea, the aroma unfamiliar yet comforting. The night had brought rest and a measure of healing, but the morning brought with it the stark reality of their situation. "You know, you can't stay here indefinitely," Jack started, breaking the silence. "It's safe for now, but once they realize you survived the crash..." Sarika nodded, her expression somber. "I understand. My people will come looking for me. They won't expect me to be with a human, though." Jack chuckled dryly. "That might actually work in our favor for a while. The patrols are regular, but they don't expect much trouble out here." He stood and walked over to a wall cluttered with maps and various navigation tools. "We need a plan," he said, tracing a route with his finger. "There are a few places we could go, but all of them involve some risk." Sarika joined him, looking over the map intently. "What about the old mining sectors?" she suggested, pointing to a series of abandoned installations marked on the map. "They're remote and largely forgotten. Could give us some cover." Jack considered this, nodding slowly. "Not a bad idea, but we'd need supplies, and more importantly, a better understanding of what we're up against." He pulled a small, rugged-looking device from a drawer, a scanner capable of intercepting communications. "This should help us keep tabs on any search parties." As they made plans, Jack taught Sarika how to use some of the survival gear and defensive tactics he'd acquired over the years. Despite her injuries, Sarika was a quick learner, her alien agility aiding her in picking up human techniques. Their days settled into a rhythm of preparation and reconnaissance. Jack took to calling their outings training sessions, although they both knew it was more than that. Each trip into the surrounding forest not only tested their physical capabilities but also deepened their trust in one another. One afternoon, while camouflaged under the dense canopy, they watched a drone hover over a nearby clearing, its sensors sweeping the area. "Automated patrol," Jack whispered, watching it through binoculars. "Standard issue. It's looking for thermal signatures that don't match the local wildlife." Sarika peered through another set of binoculars, her brow furrowed. "My people think of everything," she said with a mix of pride and regret. "They do," Jack agreed. "But so do we. We just have to be smarter." The drone eventually moved on, and they made their way back to the cabin. That evening, over another shared meal, they discussed more than just survival tactics. Jack talked about his family back on Earth, long since out of touch, and Sarika spoke of the brighter days of her childhood, when interstellar travel was still a marvel, and not just a means to an end. It's strange, Sarika mused, how two people from such different worlds can find themselves on the same side. Jack smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the universe isn't so keen on keeping us apart as our leaders are. In the quiet companionship that followed, their dialogue was punctuated by laughter and reflective pauses. A human and an alien, sharing stories under the roof of a secluded cabin, finding common ground far from the prying eyes of the world. Each story, each shared silence, wove a stronger bond between them, a silent pact to face whatever came next. Together. Over the ensuing weeks, the bond between Jack and Sarika deepened as they navigated the intricate balance of trust and survival. The crisp mornings began with tactical training and discussions about potential escape routes, but as the days melted into evenings, their conversations drifted toward less guarded territories, revealing the layers beneath their hardened exteriors. One particularly chilly morning, Jack decided it was time to test their teamwork under more realistic conditions. "We're going to run a drill today," he announced after breakfast, his voice carrying a new seriousness. "A mock evacuation, as if we've been discovered." Sarika nodded, tightening her grip on the cup of steaming coffee Jack had taught her to make. "I'm ready." They spent the morning preparing, packing supplies into lightweight backpacks and double-checking their equipment. Jack outlined the plan on a map, his finger tracing the route they would take through the dense forest to a hidden cave that could serve as a temporary hideout. "Remember, the key is to stay silent and invisible," Jack instructed as they set out, the forest canopy enveloping them in a cool shadow. "Use what you've learned about moving through these woods without leaving a trace." As they maneuvered through the underbrush, the drill quickly turned into a real test of their ability to communicate non-verbally. Jack was impressed with how quickly Sarika had adapted to human methods of stealth, her movements almost as quiet as his own. Halfway to their destination, Jack held up a hand, signaling Sarika to stop. He pointed to a patch of disturbed soil, a trap he had set up earlier. Sarika nodded, understanding, and carefully navigated around it. "You're getting good at this," Jack whispered with a smile when they reached the safety of the cave. "Better than some of my old squad mates." Sarika returned the smile, her eyes reflecting a mix of pride and gratitude. "I have an excellent teacher." They set up camp in the cave, using the time to go over other survival strategies. Jack shared stories of his military days, explaining various escape and evasion techniques. Sarika listened intently, asking questions that showed her sharp tactical mind. As the light outside began to fade, Jack turned the conversation to Sarika's skills. "You've got techniques from your world too, right? Anything you can teach me?" Sarika thought for a moment, then began describing a Valerian method for creating distractions using minimal resources, techniques that relied on an understanding of local fauna and flora to create natural alarms. "Valerians often use these methods to set up perimeters," she explained, demonstrating with some leaves and small branches. "It's about using the environment, not just your gear." Jack watched, fascinated. "I've got to admit, that's clever. We humans tend to rely too much on our tech." As night enveloped them, their conversation drifted to the stars visible through the cave entrance. Jack pointed out constellations, and Sarika shared Valerian myths associated with several celestial patterns. "Knowing the stars like this, it makes the galaxy feel a little less vast," Jack mused. "And less lonely," Sarika added softly. In that moment, a silent acknowledgement passed between them, an acknowledgement of their growing reliance on each other, not just for survival, but for a companionship that neither had expected to find on this remote, wild planet. As they prepared for the night, the trust they had carefully built offered warmth against the creeping cold, a sign that their partnership was becoming their greatest strength. Jack and Sarika's time in hiding was marked by a delicate balance of rigorous training and deepening interpersonal connections. But all the while, the threat of discovery loomed large. It was during one of their routine checks with the communication scanner, a device set to intercept any transmissions within their vicinity, that they heard the crackling voice of a Valerian commander. "Scout Team 5, report status on the search for the missing navigator, Sarika," the voice commanded, stark against the static. Jack and Sarika exchanged a glance, her eyes wide with the realization that her people had not given up their search. Jack quickly adjusted the scanner, trying to capture more details. "We found wreckage consistent with the missing vessel in Sector 7. No signs of the navigator, expanding search to adjacent sectors," another voice reported. Sarika's breath hitched. "Sector 7. That's too close." Her voice was a whisper, laced with fear and a dawning sense of inevitability. Jack's jaw tightened. We need to move, now. His decision was swift, the urgency clear in his tone. He began packing up their limited gear, his movements quick and efficient. As they prepared to leave, Sarika stood frozen, the weight of her situation settling on her shoulders. Jack, if they find me with you... They won't. We're going to make sure of that, Jack interjected. But his reassurance did little to ease the tension. They left the cave under the cover of night, moving through the thick underbrush with practiced silence. Their destination was an even more secluded location Jack knew from his military days, a forgotten outpost that had once been part of a network of emergency shelters. As they trekked, Sarika's mind raced with the implications of her people's proximity. She grappled with feelings of betrayal towards those she had once considered comrades, and the unexpected allegiance she now felt towards Jack. Their silent march was interrupted when Sarika stumbled, her foot catching on a root. Jack caught her before she fell, his hand gripping her arm. You okay? He asked, his voice low. Yes, just a lot on my mind, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Jack nodded, understanding her turmoil. We're in this together, okay? Whatever comes. They pressed on, reaching the outpost just as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky in hues of pink and orange. The outpost was dilapidated, the metal walls rusted and overgrown with vines, but it provided the cover they needed. Inside, Jack set up a perimeter defense, while Sarika scanned their surroundings with a handheld device. The tension between them was palpable, the fear of discovery casting a shadow over their strained conversation. Jack, why do you stay? After all this, why not just leave me and save yourself? Sarika asked suddenly, her question hanging in the air. Jack stopped what he was doing, turning to face her. Because that's not who I am. I don't abandon people in need, especially not friends. The word friends lingered between them, a new and fragile understanding. Sarika nodded, her heart heavy with the complexity of her emotions, gratitude, confusion, and a burgeoning sense of loyalty to the human who had become her protector, her teacher, and perhaps her only true ally. As they settled in, hidden away in the rusted shelter, they prepared for what might come next, knowing that each passing moment could bring new dangers. But amidst the uncertainty, their bond, built on shared risks and mutual trust, held firm, a testament to the unexpected paths that life sometimes takes. Jack and Sarika had barely settled into the rusting outpost when their brief respite was shattered by the piercing whir of drones overhead. Heart pounding, Jack peered through a small, grimy window, spotting the telltale flicker of searchlights sweeping through the trees. They're here, he murmured, turning to Sarika with a look that mixed determination with concern. Sarika's eyes widened, her body tensing as if ready to fight. How many? At least 3 drones by the sound of it. Could be ground troops too, Jack replied, scanning their limited arsenal of weaponry and tools. We need to move now. It's not ideal, but we have to head towards the ravine. It's our best chance to lose them. The ravine was a narrow, treacherous gorge that Jack had often used as a natural barrier during his military days. Its steep sides and dense vegetation could provide them the cover they needed to evade the drones. Grabbing their packs, they slipped out of the back of the outpost, keeping low as they moved swiftly through the underbrush. The forest around them came alive with the sounds of pursuit. Distant shouts, the crunching of boots on dry leaves, the mechanical buzz of drones slicing through the air. Keep your head down and follow my lead, Jack instructed, leading Sarika down a barely visible path that snaked towards the ravine. As they neared the gorge, the ground became steeper, the foliage thicker. Sarika stumbled, her previous injuries protesting the harsh pace, but adrenaline kept her moving. Jack reached back to grasp her hand, pulling her forward with urgency. They were nearly to the ravine when a drone suddenly swooped lower, its camera locking onto their movement. Jack cursed under his breath, pulling Sarika into a small dip in the terrain, covering them with branches and leaves. Stay still, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the drone's hovering. They lay there, barely breathing, as the drone paused, its sensors scanning the area. After a tense moment, it moved on, the sound of its rotors fading into the distance. They'll be back, Jack said, helping Sarika to her feet. We need to cross the ravine. The ravine itself was daunting, a yawning chasm lined with jagged rocks and thick roots. Jack found a narrower section and, after checking the stability of the ground, helped Sarika across. They scrambled down one side and up the other, the loose soil making their climb precarious. Once on the other side, they paused, catching their breath in the shadow of the towering trees. The forest seemed to close in around them, the sounds of their pursuers now mixed with the natural cacophony of the wilderness. "We need to keep moving," Jack said, checking his makeshift compass. "There's an old supply cache a few kilometers north. It's risky, but it might have what we need to get out of here for good." Sarika nodded, wiping sweat and dirt from her brow. "Lead the way." They set off again, the urgency of their escape lending speed to their steps. As they moved, the bond between them, their trust and mutual reliance, became their greatest asset, each covering the other's back, moving as a single, determined unit through the hostile terrain. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but they did not slow down. Jack and Sarika knew the chase was far from over, and their survival depended on their continued vigilance and unwavering courage. The forest around them held dangers, but also, perhaps, their salvation. After a grueling trek through dense, unforgiving terrain, Jack and Sarika reached the old supply cache just as dusk began to paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Hidden beneath an overgrown arbor, the cache was a small, camouflaged bunker that Jack had used years ago during reconnaissance missions. Quickly, Jack worked the rusted lock and swung open the heavy door, ushering Sarika inside. The bunker was cramped and dusty, filled with old military supplies and non-perishables. Jack's eyes scanned the shelves, grabbing what could be useful. Medical supplies, a couple of high-powered energy cells, and an old but still functional cloaking device. "This might give us the edge we need," he said, holding up the device. Sarika nodded, her face drawn and pale, but her eyes sharp. "How does it work?" "It masks our heat signature completely, makes us invisible to thermal scans. We'll use it to set up an ambush," Jack explained, quickly outlining a plan to use the ravine's narrow pass as a choke point. "If we can lure them in, we can use the environment to our advantage." As night fell, they made their way back to the ravine, the cloaking device safely stowed in Jack's pack. They set up near the edge of the cliff, where the ground was unstable but covered with thick brush that would serve as their cover. "We'll need to be quick and precise," Jack instructed, setting small charges, remnants from the bunker, along what he deemed the most likely approach paths. "Once we trigger these, the whole side of the ravine could come down. We'll have one shot at this." Sarika, her energy renewed by the plan and the hope it represented, took her position. The night was quiet, the tension palpable in the air as they waited for their pursuers. It wasn't long before they heard them. Voices carried softly on the wind, the occasional crackle of branches underfoot growing steadily louder. Jack signaled to Sarika, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. As the Valerian forces entered the narrow path leading into the ravine, Jack waited for just the right moment. When he was sure as many of their pursuers as possible were within the blast radius, he nodded to Sarika. With a deep breath, she triggered the charges. There was a deafening roar as the ground shook, trees snapped, and rocks cascaded down the sides of the ravine. Clouds of dust and debris billowed up, obscuring everything in a thick, choking haze. As the dust settled, the sounds of the forest slowly returned. Jack and Sarika peered out from their hiding spot, eyes scanning the chaos below. The ravine was now partially blocked by a landslide, and no movement could be detected. "We need to move now," Jack said, his voice urgent, "before they regroup." They quickly collected their gear and began a rapid descent away from the ravine, using the confusion and the cover of night to disappear into the deeper parts of the forest. Their hearts pounded not just from the exertion, but also from the rush of their narrow escape. As they put distance between themselves and the ravine, the realization of what they had just accomplished began to sink in. They had survived, against formidable odds, through trust and a well-executed plan. "Jack," Sarika said, her voice low and serious. "Thank you. For everything." Jack looked over at her, his expression softening. "We're not out of this yet, but we'll make it. Together." Under the cover of darkness, they continued their escape, the bonds of their unexpected alliance strengthened by the trials they had overcome. The path ahead was uncertain, and dangers still lurked at every turn. But together, they faced the future with a resolute courage that only true comrades could share. Jack and Sarika continued their journey through the night, pushing deeper into the uncharted territories of Zephyr. Exhausted but buoyed by their successful escape, they found a secluded spot near a stream to rest as dawn broke, casting a soft golden light through the dense canopy above. We should be safe here for a while, Jack murmured, scanning the area with practiced eyes. We can set up camp and figure out our next move. As they settled down, Sarika finally allowed herself to relax, the tension easing from her shoulders. She looked over at Jack, who was busy assembling a small device from parts salvaged during their escape. "What's that?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "It's a long-range communicator," Jack explained, his fingers deftly working the components. "I'm hoping we can use it to send a message out, maybe get some help." "From who?" Sarika's voice was skeptical, yet hopeful. "There are others who dissent, others who have left the conflict behind," Jack replied, not looking up from his work. "Not all humans want war, just like not all Valerians want it." The communicator took shape under Jack's skilled hands, and soon he was adjusting the dials, searching for a signal. Sarika watched him, impressed by his resourcefulness and grateful for his unwavering resolve. Finally, Jack sat back, the device humming softly between them. "Now, we wait," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "It might take a while, but someone will hear us." As the days passed, their camp by the stream became a temporary home. They fortified their position, set up traps for food, and maintained a vigilant watch. Each day, Jack would spend hours on the communicator, sending out messages, waiting for a reply that seemed increasingly unlikely. One evening, as Sarika returned from gathering food, she found Jack staring intently at the communicator, a look of disbelief on his face. "I got a response," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Really?" Sarika rushed over, excitement mingling with relief. "Yes," Jack confirmed, handing her the receiver. The voice on the other end was faint but unmistakable, offering assistance and coordinates to a safe haven, a colony where humans and aliens lived in peace, far from the conflicts that ravaged their worlds. Tears filled Sarika's eyes as she listened. Here was a chance for a new life, a place where she could belong without fear. She looked up at Jack, her voice thick with emotion. "You did it. You really did it." Jack smiled, his own eyes misty. "We did it, together." With renewed vigor, they broke camp the next day, following the coordinates provided by their new allies. The journey was long and fraught with challenges, but the promise of a peaceful life ahead spurred them on. When they finally arrived at the colony, they were greeted with open arms. Humans and aliens alike welcomed them, their community a vibrant tapestry of those who had forsaken war for peace. As Jack and Sarika stepped into this new world, they knew their lives would never be the same. The hardships they had faced had forged an unbreakable bond between them, a testament to the power of trust and cooperation. Standing side by side, they looked out over their new home, hearts full of hope. The past could not be changed, but the future was theirs to shape. Together, they would build a life defined not by conflict, but by the peace they had chosen. In the quiet of the colony, under the light of distant stars, Jack and Sarika began their new life. A life that promised not just survival, but a chance to thrive.